seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay in Oh my God! 30! No 10! Touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Oh! What a miracle finish!
And welcome back to the State of Purple podcast. Jack Day, my cohort beside me, Aj Mansour, back with you again to talk about another week in Minnesota Vikings football. Kind of a big week, Jack. We did have the schedule release for 2021. Came out a couple days after we recorded our last episode, but our first crack to take a peek at it, to discuss it, to break it down. Any first reactions when you got your hands on the schedule for the first time?
Yeah, I think you wrote an article that summed it up pretty well. There's a lot of turnover in the schedule, which is kind of weird for the Vikings. Even in the NFC North, there's going to be a lot of turnover. There could be even more turnover depending on what happens over in Green Bay. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Vikings match up with the new looking Detroit team, and potentially a rookie starting quarterback in Chicago. And then you go across the schedule where you go outside of the division. There's a lot of intriguing young quarterbacks and young superstars that the Vikings haven't played in the last few years. So there's just a lot of intriguing matchups that I'm looking forward to deep diving a little bit more today.
Yeah, and we won't bore everybody with the same takes that you've heard for 5 days now, but we're going to breeze through the schedule, kind of talk about some things that stand out to us. Reminder, this is an 18-week, 17-game schedule that does include 3 preseason games this year, 2 of which are home for the Minnesota Vikings. And you have that opportunity then to, like Jack said, see a lot of new faces outside of the division. We're seeing a couple divisions, I believe AFC North and NFC West, this year as it comes around, with players that we haven't seen in a while, teams we haven't seen in a while, and they've turned those teams over. So a lot of young quarterbacks, a lot of young players that are these budding superstars throughout the NFL, and that are opening things up with the ability to get some new look and maybe some new problems for the Minnesota Vikings, but some intrigue for the fans as well. So Jack, we'll go through game by game. I just want you to kind of tell me what stands out to you about this game. We'll go over some particulars first, I guess. The Minnesota Vikings have the 5th toughest schedule according to win percentage for opponents last year. I have some opinions on strength of schedule and how that compares from year to year that we can get into at some point, but this is going to be on paper a tough schedule for the Minnesota Vikings. Do you buy into that?
Yes and no. I saw your article and your take on this, and I agree with you. It's very early to label the schedule because it's essentially going off of all of the rosters from a year ago. So I think you have to take it with a grain of salt. A lot of these teams still have a lot of the same talent on it, but there's also new talent coming in on other teams, and there's talent leaving teams. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. I enjoyed your article, kind of not quote. I shouldn't say bashing the strength of schedule, unless that's a word that you're comfortable with saying. But
I'll use it.
I think you have to wait and see until you get to September, October, and you really start to see these teams playing. I mean, like we just said, there's a lot of young players that aren't necessarily fully proven in the league yet, and they still have, whether they're rookies in 2021 or they were rookies in 2020, they still have a long ways to go before they're established veterans within this league.
Yeah, so you mentioned the article. It's up at KFAN.com and VikingsTerritory.com right now. Just kind of saying, why do we freak out about strength of schedule each and every year? I fell into this trap. I'll call it a trap, I guess, for years and years. And you see this strength of schedule come out. You see the new schedule come out, and you look and you see a bunch of difficult teams. The Pittsburgh Steelers, the Seattle Seahawks again, upcoming Cleveland Browns are on this roster. And you kind of look at it and you think, okay, this is going to be tough. Like, we weren't a great team last year. We had some holes on this roster. Did we fill them? Did we not? We can debate that another time. But this is going to be a tough schedule. And I'm not down with that anymore. And the reference that I used in that article that really kind of pushed me away from it and pushed me almost into apathy when the schedule comes out. Like, I get excited, and we'll get talking about the exciting players that they're going to see and going to face. That's what excites me. I don't necessarily say this is an easy schedule and we're on our way to the Super Bowl, or this is a hard schedule and we're on our way to number one pick in the draft. I don't buy into that anymore. And the example that I cite in that article that you mentioned was up at Vikings Territory and KFAN.com, is the 2016 Carolina Panthers. Okay. In 2015, the Carolina Panthers went all the way to the Super Bowl. In fact, they were favored in that Super Bowl by 5.5 points over the Denver Broncos. Cam Newton, Superman. I mean, he was at the top of his game. That team seemed like it was well-rounded on the offensive side and defensive side of the football. Ron Rivera really had things clicking for those Carolina Panthers. They lose the Super Bowl. They lose by 2 scores. I think it was 14 points. Von Miller wins the MVP. Denver, runs their way to a Super Bowl. And the Carolina Panthers did not bounce back that next year. The schedule came out for that next season, and we looked at it right away. And one of the things we said is the Vikings have a really tough schedule. Look, the Carolina Panthers are on this schedule. They were just in the Super Bowl. That Carolina Panthers team stunk. Completely stunk. It wasn't a Cam Newton injury that made them stink. It wasn't a gigantic situation, but they ended up losing 5 of their first 6 games that season and never bounced back. And the Vikings game was in that first 5. I think they won 22-10 over the Panthers, and they went on to like a 6-10 record. Obviously missed the playoffs. And they went from the Super Bowl, runner-up, favored in the Super Bowl, to being a team that missed the playoffs by 3 or 4 games in one season. And there's a bunch of factors. You mentioned some of them that factor into teams going down year to year or teams going up year to year. There's injuries. The 2017, I think it was, Indianapolis Colts, Andrew Luck was injured. They had the easiest schedule in the NFL that season. Andrew Luck gets injured. They go to a 3-13 season, way missed the playoffs. I think they got the 2nd overall pick in the draft that year. You have other situations where free agents go from team to team. Free agents that either leave your team and give you a loss, or free agents that come to your team and don't live up to expectations. All those things factor in. You have young players, not even just rookies, but young players that played out of their mind the year before and don't do it, and veterans do this as well, I guess, and don't live up to expectations the second year, or it goes the other way. You have a rookie who didn't do much their rookie year, or a wide receiver, and they go into their 3rd year and something clicks and they figure it out and the team changes completely. So you have 3 teams. I mentioned the Indianapolis Colts in 2017, the 2015 Atlanta Falcons, and the 2019 Washington football team. They all had the easiest schedules that year, and they all missed the playoffs by multiple games. Like, it wasn't even close. Just they didn't have whatever it was the year before. Something factored in, the injuries. All these things can factor in. So I don't buy in to the toughest schedule. Now, there's another argument, Jack, and I want to hear your opinion on this, that teams that get battle tested with more difficult schedules in the regular season, albeit you have to be a good team, right? You have to have success in those difficult games. But if you are battle tested by a difficult schedule, you might have more success in once you get to the playoffs. The stat that I pulled out in that article, let me find it real quick. Again, you can find this deep dive, VikingsTerritory.com, KFAN.com. Where is it here? In the past 2 decades, half of the Super Bowl winners had a schedule that was in the top 1/3 of difficulty leading into that season. So obviously this is based on the year before, but these half of the last Super Bowl winners in the last 20 years were teams that started that season saying, we have a difficult schedule. So when you see that the Vikings have the 5th most difficult schedule, don't freak out about it. It probably will not end up as the 5th most difficult schedule. More than likely it won't. Maybe it'll be a little more difficult, but the odds are that it's going to be less difficult than the 5th overall. Based off of this, Jack, any thoughts on the case that I just laid out, where we shouldn't care at all about difficulty of schedule?
No, I love it. I think you hit the nail on the head when saying that, just because there's a very real chance that we're 8-9 weeks into the season, and if the Vikings end up sitting, they have 6 or 7 wins at that time frame or that time point, I'm not going to be shocked when I start hearing, whether it's Packers fans, NFL fans, Kirk Cousins haters, whatever it may be, there's a legitimate chance that the Vikings schedule drops from the 5th hardest schedule to the 5th easiest schedule, and that swing a game. So we're sitting here right now, it's too hard to pinpoint that. Yes, like I said, that it's the 5th hardest schedule, but that's off of last year. There's a lot of variables that are going to change, not even when the regular season starts, but from now up until the end of preseason. Like I said, injuries are going to play a factor. There's going to be several scenarios that could happen. that could change the Vikings' strength of schedule. And I am with you. I don't think it's fair to buy into it this early.
Well, and you mentioned Aaron Rodgers. That alone could shift everything completely, right? Then your divisional games look a whole lot different. That schedule goes a lot easier there. We've seen enough teams run from the wild card to the Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl. We've seen a bunch of Peyton Manning-led teams or really good teams that get a bye in the first week of the playoffs, and then they lose their next game in the divisional round. So all of these things, what you want to be doing is assessing your own roster. You want to be looking at this team. Are they going to be better than they were last year? Do they have the ability to put points on the board? Do they have the ability to keep points off the board? Look internally right now. That's all we should be doing. Mini camps, OTAs are kicking off. Look internally at this team. Have fun with what it may turn into. I think that most fans don't think that they're going to play as poorly as they did last year. That alone should give you hopes of making the playoffs. And from there, it's a crapshoot. Clearly, yes, you might want to buy to get your players healthy. Clearly, yeah, you want a higher seed to have home field advantage. But beyond that, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter because it could go either way no matter what. So we'll throw that aside. You want to read that article, KFAN.com, VikingsTerritory.com. You can get the entire breakdown there. Let's go through the schedule, Jack, week by week. I want to just hear some highlights that you have for these weeks. We don't have to say whether or not they should be favored or win these games. We don't have to do a predictive record. If you want to, by all means, say this should be winnable, whatever. But I want to know more so what you're excited about, starting with week number 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals, a noon game on the road in Cincinnati against the Joe Burrow-led, we think, Cincinnati Bengals. We think, because he may not be back. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I think that's obviously the main storyline heading into that week. It's going to rely on the health of Joe Burrow's knee. Obviously, he tore his ACL last season, and he was kind of battling behind a subpar offensive line, and the Cincinnati Bengals went out, and they didn't address that with the 5th overall pick this year. Instead, they bring back Joe Burrow's and Justin Jefferson's former national championship winning teammate in Jamar Chase. I'm excited to see that offense. I think the Cincinnati Bengals offense is going to be a fantasy football galore offense with, if Joe Mixon can stay healthy, he's a very good feature back, top 10 back in the league when he can stay healthy. You go out, you have T. Higgins now, Tyler Boyd, and then you add another dynamic playmaker in Jamar Chase. Really excited to see how it turns out on the offensive side of the ball, but it all comes down to the health of Joe Burrow's knee. I think that's the main storyline. Obviously, the LSU storyline is going to be there as well. I don't think Cincinnati's defense is as strong as it should be heading into the season, especially when you have a quarterback coming into his sophomore season with kind of an unproven roster still. So I do think this is a very winnable game for the Vikings, but like you said, it's interesting. I'm excited to see that whole AFC North, other than Ben Roethlisberger and Pittsburgh. It's going to be full of quarterbacks that the Vikings haven't seen over the last 3 years because there's some young studs in that division. So you start out week 1 with a very winnable game, in my opinion, but it's going to really come down to the health of Joe Burrow and how that plays out over the summer and then into preseason.
It could be really exciting on the offensive side of the football on both sides. Both teams able to put points up, or it could be, do you know who the Bengals backup quarterback is?
I do not off the top of my head.
Brandon Allen. It could be the Brandon Allen-led Bengals, which I think would make a bit of a difference. Week number 2, Vikings stay on the road. They head to Arizona to see Kyler Murray, J.J. Watt, DeAndre Hopkins, and the Arizona Cardinals. What stands out to you with this game?
Speaking of young quarterbacks, again, I think Kyler Murray is one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch in the entire NFL. This is a game where I think Vikings fans in particular would have enjoyed this game if it would have been in December. It would have been a more fun away game to go to in Arizona rather than going there right in the beginning of the season in week 2. But I'm excited to see how J.J. Watt, if he can help turn around some of the struggles that they've had on defense. Isaiah Simmons is another guy who they took early in last year's draft out of Clemson, who was kind of labeled as this jack of all trades. He can play safety, he can rush a quarterback, he can play linebacker, he can play cornerback. I don't think they utilized him properly in 2020 in his rookie season. That could have been if he wasn't picking up the playbook fast enough. But I'm excited to see if that defense can start to make that turn. And then you mentioned some of the big names as well. Kyler Murray. Excited to see what happens with Minnesota legend himself, Larry Fitzgerald. He is a free agent still. I don't know if he's going to retire. Is there a chance he's back in Arizona? Is there a chance he somehow manages to find his way on the Vikings roster? I don't think that's extremely realistic, but it's another storyline to pay attention to heading into that game. But I think it all comes down to quarterback play again in this one, and I'm extremely excited to see how the Vikings, I want to say new defense. It's not fully new, but there's going to be a lot of guys returning from last year that didn't play last year.
Right.
Have some rookies as well on that defense. I'm excited to see how Mike Zimmer can handle one of the best mobile quarterbacks in the game with hopefully a healthy defense.
Traditionally, Mike Zimmer-led defenses struggle. Well, I shouldn't say that. Traditionally, Minnesota defenses, which have been Mike Zimmer-led for a while now, struggle against mobile quarterbacks. So that could be ugly, or it couldn't be, but who knows. Week number 3, the Vikings return home, but they get another mobile quarterback in Russell Wilson. We'll see DK Metcalf in person for the first time, or at least in Minnesota, the opportunity to get a win against the Seahawks at home for your home opener.
Yeah, the main storyline, I think that you've probably seen. If you're a Vikings fan, you've seen this everywhere by now. The Vikings have a game against the Seattle Seahawks, and it's at home, and it's not a primetime game. The Vikings don't have to travel to Seattle. They don't have to deal with that 12th man where they've struggled for many years. But I was at the game where they played last in Minnesota when it was negative 20 degrees or so, and the whole Blair Walsh incident happened. I'm sure that video will be played at some point during the broadcast as well, which is painful for Vikings fans, but maybe they can actually get a win. I think they were very, very close to beating Seattle last year in Seattle. If Cameron Dantzler makes a play, or I think if it was Alexander Madison hits a hole, it was one of the running backs missed the hole that I think Dalvin Cook would hit if Dalvin Cook would have stayed healthy for that entire game. I think the Vikings, this is another game that it's winnable, but it's going to be a really tough task with a very good Seattle football team coming to Minnesota.
Right. It was an interesting situation because DK Metcalf was held pretty quiet until that final drive when he was unstoppable. And it led to the, what are you doing? Or Cam Dantzler, what are you doing? From PA, which is legendary and will always be remembered for Minnesota fans.
I think there were some select words from Harrison Smith that were caught on the broadcast as well after. I don't know if it was after that exact play, but I remember there was something that you couldn't hear what Harrison Smith was saying, but you could very visibly see what he was saying to Cameron Dantzler.
Yeah, a little miscommunication on that touchdown there. Week 4, this is the game that I think a lot of picture just fell. A lot of people have highlighted on their calendar the Cleveland Browns, a home game against an upstart Cleveland Browns. Kevin Stefanski, Baker Mayfield, Odell Beckham Jr. back on the field. Lots of young players, Nick Chubb, Myles Garrett. The Cleveland Browns are an exciting team, and it's good to see them on the schedule for a home game for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, this is one of the games that I circled with that I was most excited for, that Cleveland was coming to Minnesota, a game that Vikings fans can go to. The offense is up and coming. Kevin Stefanski is going to be a huge storyline. His first game back in Minnesota against his former team. Matchup that I'm excited for. They signed Jadeveon Clowney, and they also have Myles Garrett, who you said. So this is going to be a big test for the Vikings offensive line, the newly refurbished offensive line with Darisaw and potentially Wyatt Davis as well. Excited to see how if they can hold their own, if Darisaw is able to hold his own against two very good pass rushers that have already proven themselves in the NFL.
Week 5 is the Detroit Lions. This is a home game against the Lions. We'll breeze through this one. It'll be a different looking team. Penei Sewell, obviously a new quarterback, Jared Goff. We'll breeze straight through that. Should be winnable. The Carolina Panthers, the same thing. Should be a winnable game. Christian McCaffrey should be healthy, but by then in week 6, who knows? And then the Vikings head to a week 7 bye. A little bit of an early bye, but we have a Thursday, Monday swing later on that'll give us a little rest on the back end of the season. But a week 7 bye to give them some rest. And then this is my least favorite game on the entire schedule, not because of the opponent, but because week 8, they have a Sunday night football game on Halloween night, which means a 7 o'clock kickoff, and my little boys are going to be dressed up like Black Panther and Woody from Toy Story, and I'm going to be home with them. That's the decision I'm making. I'll have to figure out how to get to the game afterwards, but we're going to go trick-or-treating, and then we're going to go to the game. Are you going trick-or-treating?
I will not be. I do not have kids. No kids yet.
Probably a good decision for you. Dallas Cowboys, though, kind of a cool idea with Halloween night, Sunday night. Obviously, it's bumming for all the parents out there, but on the surface, if you're just a football fan, that's kind of a cool marquee game.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Dallas is a fairly familiar familiar team. The Vikings have played Dak Prescott. They're a very talented offense. Excited to see how Micah Parsons fits into that defense. Obviously, I think he was one of the top defensive players in the entire 2021 draft. And because of how quarterback heavy it was, he slid all the way down to, I think it was pick 9 or 10. Whenever Dallas made their selection, drafted Micah Parsons. One other interesting thing for me that might not be as interesting to other Vikings fans, but I just wrote an article on KFAN.com comparing Dak Prescott to new Vikings quarterback Kellen Mond. And if you want to see how similar, it's eerily similar, how similar their statistics were in college and some of the records they hold for their respected schools, go check that article out as well. It's crazy how similar their stats were from college. So that's really the only thing I have on that. And like I said, the Micah Parsons, the Trayvon Diggs is always going to be a storyline as well whenever he plays the Vikings, just because he has ties to his brother, but should be a fun Halloween night for Vikings fans.
Right. Zeke doesn't scare me. CeeDee Lamb will be interesting. Mari Cooper. But again, maybe a high-scoring affair. Who knows? Week 9, travel on the road to see former MVP of the league, Lamar Jackson, and the Baltimore Ravens. Another entertaining game. Baltimore fell off a little bit last year, but they have the ability, and they should be within striking distance to be a competitive team this year.
Yeah, another mobile quarterback for Vikings fans to worry about when they're going. Probably the best mobile quarterback in the NFL when in terms of talking about just what he can do with his legs on the ground. Does have a little bit of a tie to Minnesota as well, with them selecting Rashad Bateman in the first round. So that'll be an interesting matchup to see how the former Golden Gopher matches up with Cameron Dantzler or Patrick Peterson, whatever side he's lined up on.
Week number 10, we go out to the West Coast, Los Angeles Chargers. Get to see Justin Herbert. You get to see some young wide receivers and a pretty good defender in Joey Bosa on the other side of the football.
Yeah, and like we've said this entire show, speaking of young quarterbacks, we have the player that beat out Justin Jefferson for Offensive Rookie of the Year. I know some Vikings fans were a little bit upset about that, but Justin Herbert was breaking some quarterback rookie records as well, had a phenomenal season. They went out and drafted Rashawn Slater, shored up that offensive line. They have some playmakers on offense, and they have a quarterback that's coming off a very, very good rookie season. So it's going to be another fun one in Los Angeles. I know there's a lot of Chargers fans that when they were given the Vikings for their 17th game, they were saying that this is going to be an easy win. Let's see if the Chargers fan base can fill up that brand new stadium in Los Angeles, because they weren't able to fill up a soccer stadium the last time these two teams played. So that'll be an interesting storyline to watch for as well.
Week 11, head back to the division. You get your first look at the not Aaron Rodgers-led Green Bay Packers. We'll see. This is my favorite graphic to put together without the Aaron Rodgers pictures. Replace him with Love. Who knows what this game's going to look like, but games against your divisional rivals, your border rivals, are always going to be a little difficult.
Yeah, and I think the Vikings kind of drew the short end of the stick with this one. Both of these divisional games against especially if Aaron Rodgers is playing, I think he's earned enough respect, and the Packers have earned enough respect where I can say right now they are the best team in the division if Aaron Rodgers is playing. I would prefer the Vikings to play in Lambeau earlier on for the Vikings' sake, but for my nerdy football obsession with cold weather, potential snow games, there's another game that follows this. This is the home game for the Vikings, and then they have shaping up to be a fun one in Lambeau, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
And then rounding out just a slaughter at coming out of the bye, you have the San Francisco 49ers, a road game. And when I say coming out of the bye, I mean coming out of the bye, you have Dallas, Baltimore, Chargers on the road. Baltimore was on the road as well. Green Bay Packers, San Francisco 49ers on the road. This is a tough test, a tough slate for this team that's really going to prove their worth and whether or not they're a competitive football team. But the San Francisco 49ers, another upstart young team, innovative young players. Trey Lance might be the quarterback at this point in time. New faces on that roster as well.
Yeah, I'm interested to see. I think that'll be the storyline that will be most followed leading up to this game. Is it going to be Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback? Or are we going to see the former Minnesota high school quarterback and NDSU quarterback in Trey Lance? Does he take over by this point? There's still a lot of talent on that roster. Similar situation to kind of what the Vikings were a year ago, where they just battled with a ton of injuries on that defensive side of the ball. But when they get their players back, I think they feel fairly confident that they have one of the top defenses in the league. And I think there's a lot of Vikings fans, and Mike Zimmer might tell you that himself. The Vikings feel the same way. They had a lot of defensive pieces go down that were vital to the success of the defense last year. and that's why the defense kind of fell off. Very similar to San Francisco, so it's going to be a very interesting matchup.
Week 13, you close out your doubleheader with the Detroit Lions with your road game. We can skip that one again. Move on to week 14, a Thursday night football game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. You do host the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ben Roethlisberger over the hill. Najee Harris added to the mix. Obviously, that wide receiving core still dangerous. Chase Claypool. Some of those names that we're going to be talking about, but I don't necessarily fear this game. Am I wrong in thinking that?
I don't think so. I'm not terrified of what Ben Roethlisberger is doing at this point of his career. Yes, they have a extremely talented wide receiver corps with Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and then they did re-sign Juju Smith-Schuster, I believe, to a one-year deal for 2021. They go out and get Najee Harris, so the skilled positions are intimidating, but overall, I'm not super scared of Pittsburgh anymore because Ben Roethlisberger is not Ben Roethlisberger of what he was 10 years ago.
Right. Not until week 15 that we get our first look at the Chicago Bears. This is a road game, Monday Night Football in Chicago. Justin Fields, I guess, is the talker here. New quarterback for the Chicago Bears. Number one on the depth chart, according to the Bears Twitter account, but we'll have to see how that shakes out. By week 15, he'll probably be playing, though.
We will have to see, and this is going to be a game where if the Vikings lose to a Justin Fields-led Chicago Bears team, there's going to be a lot of Vikings fans all over Twitter blowing up Twitter feeds saying the Vikings could have had Justin Fields instead of Kellen Mond. Justin Fields would have been starting over Kirk Cousins. I don't buy into that. I buy into the Vikings that having interest in Justin Fields. I don't think it was ever a plan for Justin Fields to come in and start over Kirk Cousins. There's Bears fans already saying if Aaron Rodgers leaves that Justin Fields is the best quarterback in the division. I don't buy into that either because Kirk Cousins has been pretty darn good over the last 3 seasons, and he gets a lot of heat for some of his bad games. But I feel very confident going into, like you said, a very difficult schedule up front. But I think I'm confident in saying that Kirk Cousins is the guy for at least the remainder of the 2021 season. I will say this on this game too. We thought we got out of these primetime scary games with not having to travel to Seattle. But was this one at Soldier Field? Is this the away game? Yeah. So we get a Monday night. It wouldn't be a complete schedule without a game in Seattle in primetime or a game at Soldier Field in primetime. So we got out of the Seattle game, but we still do have to travel to Chicago for a Monday night showdown against a team that is going to be interesting to watch if it's Andy Dalton or Justin Fields at this point in the season.
Absolutely. Week 16, you host the Los Angeles Rams, another upstart team, familiar quarterback in Matthew Stafford that is out there with the Rams now. But you do have a home game. Anything in particular outside of the Matthew Stafford stand out to you with this one?
Nothing too crazy. One of the top defenses in the league coming in here. It'll be a true test for the Vikings offense, but it's going to be weird watching 2 games of the Detroit Lions going up against the Vikings with Jared Goff and then transitioning to another game in the season where you play the Rams with a former foe and Matthew Stafford leading the way for the Rams.
And this is the game you were mentioning, Sunday Night Football on the road, Week 17. This is the beginning of January against the Green Bay Packers. Could be meaningless, could be very important. Who knows? But a road game at Lambeau is never, quote-unquote, fun.
No, and we saw that last year the Vikings actually came out of Lambeau with the win after getting embarrassed early on at home against Green Bay. At this point, we already talked about the first Packers showdown. At this point, all I'm going to say about this game is I'm hoping it's like a nice, balmy 25-degree night with some snow falling. I think that's how football is meant to be played. So I know it's not always beneficial for the Vikings. As I did see a stat recently of the games they play on turf and the games they play on grass. And as you could imagine, as we've seen over the last several years, it's their record on grass is substantially worse than it is on turf. But I loved when they played at TCF Bank Stadium. I know it wasn't a quote unquote NFL ready stadium, but it was fun being able to watch the Vikings play outside in some cold weather games and have some snowflakes falling. Looking forward to this one for that. Just hopefully with some nice weather.
Right. And Trey Lance doesn't have a whole lot of experience outdoors either. So I'm sorry, Jordan Love.
Jordan Love. Yep.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong picture as I was referencing the wrong name. That's how it works sometimes. And then we round out, actually, real quick, before we leave that Green Bay game, you may have heard the spots on KFAN. We're actually taking a bus load of fans and friends to Green Bay with Defined Destinations. So shameless plug, head to definedestinations.com if you're interested in taking a bus with KFAN out to Green Bay for this game in Lambeau in January. The final game, Week 18, the 17th game on the slate, the Chicago Bears, a home game at least. But again, these late season games against the Bears, whether the Bears are in it or out of it, are always scary, and the Vikings seem to lay an egg more often than not in these games. It's cost them trips to the playoffs. It's cost them seeding in the playoffs. Hopefully it isn't the case this season.
Yeah, it's even cost them some players, honestly, in years past as well, with Mackenzie Alexander getting hurt before, I think it was the 2019 playoffs, and there was some weird drama along the lines of he didn't think that he should have played, but apparently he still has good feelings about Minnesota because he's back in Minnesota. So I'll take it. But yeah, it's a weird, I feel like we always end up playing the Bears towards the end of the season at home. And it's always just a weird feeling game. Even if there's nothing on the line, it's just weird. That's the best way I can explain it. It's weird.
Mandatory voluntary workouts are starting. It's a big talker in the NFL. Are you concerned, I guess, if any of your veteran players don't show up for these voluntary workouts coming up here?
I don't think so. I think there's still some limitations in these buildings. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm assuming there's still some COVID-19 regulations, and I expect those to start to loosen as the summer goes on. So I don't think it's anything to look into too much. I feel like there's always veterans that are missing out on the voluntary ones, and I think there's a problem with if we get the mandatory mini camps and OTAs and guys like the Delvin Cooks of the world, if they weren't showing up because of contract issues. I think a name to keep an eye on certainly is Danielle Hunter. I know it sounds like things have simmered down with him being upset about his contract, but I still think Danielle Hunter is rightfully a little bit bothered by his contract because he's outplayed that. I know the Vikings signed him a few years ago, and he's been on a very team-friendly deal over the last couple seasons. I think his contract is up at the end of the 2023 season, so he's certainly another player to keep an eye on as we get closer to mandatory practices.
Here's what I'll say about that real quick is I'm not going to be upset if people don't show up to this, but it will say something to me, especially for Minnesota Vikings players who have a state-of-the-art facility. Everything you could have at home, the comforts of home, and then some are in this facility when it comes to food, when it comes to rehab, when it comes to the comforts of the locker room, whatever that is. So you have no excuse that you're, training the way you want to train, because any way you want to train, you can train that way here. But it will say something to me about leadership of this team if they just choose their own stuff against the team. This is a young team. This is a team that has been through some weird situations with COVID restrictions, with a losing season last year. It's time to bounce back, and I think it's time to show some leadership. So at certain key positions, we're talking the quarterback, we're talking the either official captains or sedimentary captains of the defense. If you're not there, I think it does say something to the rest of your teammates. Now, maybe I'm blowing that up on the outside of the locker room more than they are inside, but I do think that it does say something. So we'll pay attention to that as we go into the rest of this week and the rest of the offseason. But for now, Jack, you have an article up you mentioned at KFAN.com comparing Kellen Mond to Dak Prescott and some of their statistics, some of their styles of play. You can read that one right now at KFAN.com. I've got a bunch of schedule analysis, why we shouldn't worry about the strength of schedule, the difficulty of the schedule, some of the highlights of the schedule that are up at KFAN.com and Vikings territory as well. But yeah, we'll probably throw it off and punt. How about that? We'll punt for this week until we join again next week to talk about what we're seeing and learning from this team as they start to do some of those team activities. So let's sign off now. Jack, thank you for another week. Appreciate it. We'll be back next Tuesday to record another episode of the State of Purple podcast. Jack, we'll see you later, man.
See you later.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Oh, my knee!